Lieutenant Cassidy Cass Morgan stood at attention, her back rigid as a steel beam, while Admiral Thornton paced around her like a vulture circling a particularly disappointing carcass. The court-martial had been a foregone conclusion from the start. You just don't reprogram the Galactic Alliance flagship's AI to tell jokes during a diplomatic meeting with the Centaurian Federation, especially not jokes about their ambassador's unusual number of appendages. Lieutenant Morgan, Admiral Thornton said, her voice as cold as the vacuum of space, do you have any idea how many treaties we had to renegotiate because you thought it would be hilarious if the computer asked Ambassador Krith if he needed a hand, or perhaps 3? Cass bit her lower lip to suppress a smile. 12 treaties, 17 trade agreements, and 1 marriage proposal? Ma'an. The joke apparently translates as a mating ritual in Southern Centaurian. The Admiral's face flushed crimson. This isn't the first time your so-called genius has caused interstellar incidents, Morgan. Your file reads like a comedy of errors, except nobody's laughing, especially not the Military Engineering Corps' Budget Committee. With all due respect, Admiral, my modifications to the Hermes-class engines increased efficiency by 34%. That saved the Alliance more credits than. Enough. The Admiral slammed her palm on the desk, causing the holographic display to flicker. Your technical brilliance is matched only by your complete inability to follow protocol or chain of command. The tribunal has been exceedingly merciful. Merciful? Cass couldn't help but scoff. They're sending me to KX-417. It's a death sentence with extra steps. KX-417. Just the designation made her stomach clench. A barren rock on the edge of charted space, supposedly uninhabitable according to preliminary scans. No breathable atmosphere, minimal water, extreme temperature fluctuations, and at least 6 months from the nearest Alliance outpost. Standard protocol classified it as unsuitable for colonization, which was military speak for don't even bother. Admiral Thornton pulled up a holographic display of the planet, a miserable-looking dust ball with angry red atmospheric readings. You should be grateful. The traditional punishment for your level of insubordination would be 20 years in a military prison. Instead, you're being given a research opportunity. A research opportunity? Cass laughed, a sharp sound devoid of humor. Let's call it what it is. Exiled to die alone on a rock so inhospitable, even the xenobiologists refused to study it. Your exile pod will contain 6 months of emergency rations, basic tools, and a standard survey kit, the Admiral continued as if Cass hadn't spoken. Your assignment is simple: collect geological and atmospheric data until... She trailed off. Until I inevitably perish. Very humanitarian of you, Admiral. Thornton's eyes narrowed. Until extraction, which will be scheduled after a standard evaluation period. Consider it a chance to prove your usefulness to the Alliance without your trademark disruptions. Cass knew what that meant. There would be no extraction. This was the military's way of disposing of a problem without the bad press of an execution. Lieutenant Cassidy Morgan, the most brilliant engineer to come through the academy in decades, was being discarded like faulty equipment. When do I leave? Cass asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Immediately. Your pod has already been prepared. 4 hours later, Cass found herself strapped into an exile pod barely larger than a standard escape craft. It contained the promised supplies, rations that tasted like reconstituted cardboard, tools that would have been considered outdated a century ago, and a survey kit with half its sensors non-functional. Her personal effects had been limited to one small container into which she had crammed her toolkit, smuggled past 3 security checkpoints, her father's ancient paper book on mechanical engineering, and a small holo of her sister. The launch bay was empty except for a few technicians and Admiral Thornton, who stood at a safe distance, hands clasped behind her back. Any last words of wisdom, Admiral? Cass called out as the final launch preparations began. Thornton approached the pod, her expression unreadable. Try not to die too quickly, Lieutenant. The Alliance has invested considerable resources in your training. I'll do my best to die on schedule then. Morgan, Thornton said, her voice dropping slightly, if by some miracle you survive until extraction review, A demonstrated improvement in your attitude toward authority would be noted in my recommendations. The pod door began to close, and Cass offered a lazy, mocking salute. Send me a calendar invite for that review, Admiral. I'll pencil it in right after breathe non-existent oxygen and before freeze to death in alien wasteland. The last thing she saw before the pod sealed was Admiral Thornton's face, a curious mix of irritation and something that might, on anyone else, have looked like regret. The launch sequence was brutally efficient. Within minutes, Cass was ejected from the Alliance cruiser like human garbage being taken out. The pod's barely adequate inertial dampeners struggled as it accelerated toward KX-417, leaving Cass fighting waves of nausea. Through the small viewing port, she watched the cruiser grow smaller until it was just another pinprick of light among the stars. "Computer," she said to the pod's limited AI, "estimated arrival time to KX-417? 8 hours, 23 minutes to atmospheric entry," the flat, synthetic voice replied. "Survival probability upon landing, 17%. Cass leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. "At least someone around here is honest about my chances." As the pod hurtled through space toward what was almost certainly her death, Lieutenant Cassidy Morgan did what she always did in impossible situations. She started to plan. Because if the Galactic Alliance thought sending her to die on a dead planet would be the end of her story, they had severely underestimated her capacity for spite. And spite, as it turned out, was an excellent survival motivation. Survival 101. The pod crashed with all the grace of a drunk rhinoceros attempting ballet. After the violent shaking stopped and the ringing in her ears subsided to a dull roar, Cass pried herself from the safety harness and assessed the damage. Miraculously, she was alive. Less miraculously, the pod was wedged at a 45-degree angle in what appeared to be violet-colored sand. "Computer, atmospheric analysis," she croaked, tasting blood from where she'd bitten her cheek during landing. "Atmospheric composition: nitrogen 68%, oxygen 26%, argon 4%, trace gases 2%. Temperature: 32 degrees Celsius. Radiation levels: elevated but within human tolerance. Congratulations, Lieutenant Morgan. You are not immediately dead." Cass blinked. "Wait, what? Breathable atmosphere? That's not what the preliminary scans showed. Official Alliance records for KX-417 appear to be inaccurate. Would you like me to file a correction form?" "Indeed. Sure, addressed to people who left me here to die. I'm sure they'll get right on updating their databases." She grabbed the emergency kit and cracked the pod's hatch. The blast of hot air that greeted her smelled like burnt cinnamon and copper. Squinting against the harsh light of KX-417's sun, a bloated orange thing that took up far too much of the sky Cass surveyed her new home. Well, I'll be damned. The dead planet was very much alive. The violet sand stretched toward the horizon, punctuated by clusters of crystalline formations that refracted the sunlight into rainbow patterns. In the distance, what looked suspiciously like vegetation swayed in the hot breeze, tubular structures the color of rust with bulbous tops that occasionally emitted puffs of iridescent spores. Most surprising of all was the water. A sluggish river of deep blue liquid meandered about half a kilometer from her crash site. "Computer, is that water safe?" "Unknown. Preliminary scan suggests high mineral content. Further analysis required." Cass climbed out of the pod, wincing as her bruised body protested. The gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth standard, just enough to make her movements feel bouncy without the disorientation of true low-G environments. First things first, don't die of dehydration. She grabbed her survey kit and headed toward the river. 3 hours and several minor discoveries later, Cass had established some critical facts about KX-417. 1. The water was technically drinkable after filtration, though it tasted like licking a battery. 2. The crystal formations were silicon-based life forms that grew at a rate visible to the naked eye. 3. The pod's landing had disturbed something underneath the sand that was now making distinctly unhappy sounds. Oh, come on. Cass leapt backwards as the violet sand erupted, and a creature that resembled a cross between an armadillo and a ceiling fan emerged, its metallic-looking plates rotating in obvious agitation. The computer, hostile life form analysis, insufficient data. Recommendation, do not antagonize the unknown species. No kidding. Cass scrambled to higher ground as the creature spun itself into a blur and launched across the sand, like a lethal frisbee. Using her survey kit case as a shield, Cass deflected the creature's first attack. It ricocheted off with a sound like striking a gong and disappeared back under the sand. Note to self, local fauna extremely territorial and apparently part heavy metal, she muttered, heart pounding, tentatively naming it Discus bastardus. With the immediate threat temporarily gone, Cass focused on turning the pod into something resembling a shelter. By nightfall, which came with stunning abruptness, as the orange sun dipped below the horizon, she had reoriented the pod to sit flat on its base. It deployed the minimal solar collectors and created a perimeter of crystal life forms that seemed to emit a low-level electromagnetic field that repelled the smaller creatures. Inside the pod, she inventoried her supplies and confronted the uncomfortable truth. 6 months of rations might stretch to 8 with careful rationing. But she'd need to find local food sources to survive long-term. And long-term survival had suddenly gone from laughably impossible to stubbornly probable. As twilight faded into a night illuminated by 3 small moons, Cass sat on top of her pod and updated her journal. Day 1 on planet death sentence, didn't die, found water, weird crystal critters, and homicidal frisbee monsters. Admiral Thornton either has the worst intel in the galaxy, or she paused, the implications hitting her, or she knew exactly what she was sending me to. The night grew colder, and strange calls echoed across the landscape. Bioluminescent particles drifted through the air like fireflies made of blue electricity. One landed on her hand, tickling rather than burning. Computer, update survival probability. Based on current data, 42%. Cass grinned into the alien darkness, getting better already. By the end of her second week on KX-417, Cass had established a surprisingly functional base camp. The pod served as sleeping quarters, while a canopy of salvaged thermal sheeting protected her workstation from the elements. She'd discovered that the crystalline life forms which she'd named glints could be carefully harvested and used as power sources for small electronics. The Discus bastardus, now plural, as she'd encountered several, had been mostly kept at bay by a perimeter of sonic emitters jury-rigged from communication equipment. Cass was in the middle of dissecting what appeared to be an edible tuber when she had the distinct feeling of being watched. "If that's another sandworm trying to steal my tools, I swear I'll turn you into a wind chime," she announced to the apparently empty landscape. A sound like marbles rolling across glass answered her. Slowly she turned toward the noise, multi-tool gripped tightly. At the edge of her camp stood the most improbable alien she could have imagined. The creature was roughly humanoid, standing about 4 feet tall with limbs that seemed to have one too many joints. Its skin, if you could call it that, resembled polished hematite, reflecting the sunlight in metallic sheens of blue and purple. Most striking were its eyes, 3 opalescent orbs arranged in a triangle on its face. "Well, hello there," Cass said, keeping her voice level. "I'm guessing this is your planet I've crashed on." Barren. The alien tilted its head at an angle that made Cass's neck hurt just watching. It made the marble rolling sound again, followed by a series of clicks. Right. Language barrier. Classic. She pointed to herself. "Cass. I'm Cass." The alien mimicked the gesture, pressing what appeared to be a hand with 7 tapering fingers to its chest. "KTLK. Katilk? That's your name?" The creature nodded, an unmistakably human gesture that startled her. "You've met humans before?" Cass asked, then immediately felt stupid. Of course it hadn't understood her. But to her shock, KTLK gestured for her to follow and began walking toward the distant ridge Cass had been meaning to explore. The computer, she called back to the pod. "If I don't return in 6 hours, update my journal to say followed shiny alien. Probably stupid idea." Noted, Lieutenant. Projected survival probability now 38%. "Your confidence is overwhelming," she muttered, grabbing her emergency pack and falling in step behind KTLK. An hour's hike brought them to the ridge, and what lay beyond it nearly stopped Cass's heart. A settlement sprawled across the valley below. Dozens of structures that resembled upside-down teardrop-shaped pods were clustered around a central plaza. Several of the buildings showed significant damage, blackened craters and collapsed sections. But most shocking was the unmistakable outline of a crashed spacecraft, distinctly non-human in design, partially buried at the valley's edge. "You're not just native wildlife, are you?" Cass breathed. "You're a civilization." KTLK made an elaborate gesture that somehow conveyed both pride and sorrow, then led her down toward the settlement. The reception committee was a group of 8 beings similar to KTLK, each with subtle variations in their metallic skin coloration. They surrounded Cass, touching her uniform, hair and equipment with surprising gentleness while making those same marble and click sounds. One alien, slightly taller than the rest with a coppery sheen to its skin, stepped forward. It placed something that looked like a jagged seashell near her ear. The object emitted a soft hum. "You, Skyfall, like others." The words were disjointed, mechanical, but unmistakably translated English. Cass fought to keep her jaw from dropping. "I fell from the sky, yes, but I don't know who others are." The translator hummed louder. "Others, come, take, break." The tall alien gestured to the damaged buildings. "Take Krith, take crystals, take water." "The Krith that's you? Your people?" "Krith, yes. You not take?" "No," Cass shook her head emphatically. "I was sent here to die, actually. Bit of a miscommunication with my superiors." The translator struggled with this, producing a series of discordant tones before the alien gave up and simply pointed to the crashed spacecraft. "Others come back. Soon. Take more." As the meaning sank in, Cass felt a chill, despite the planet's heat. KX-417 wasn't uninhabited or uninhabitable. It was being systematically plundered by some unknown alien race, and the native Krith were powerless to stop it. "How long?" she asked, pointing to the sky. "When do others come back?" The translator hummed, and the copper-skinned alien held up what appeared to be 4 fingers. 4 cycles. Moon death and return. 4 lunar cycles. Given what she'd observed of the moon's phases, that gave her about 2 months. KTLK tugged at her sleeve and pointed to a damaged piece of equipment near one of the ruined buildings. It looked like some kind of generator, its internal components exposed. "You fix?" the translator asked. Cass walked over and examined the device. The technology was unfamiliar but not incomprehensible. Some kind of energy converter, damaged but repairable with the right tools. "I can fix this," she said, a plan already forming, and a lot more. "But first I need to know everything about these others." The copper-skinned Krith's 3 eyes blinked in unison. "You help Krith?" Cass thought about Admiral Thornton, about being discarded, about this peaceful species being exploited and captured. 6 months ago, she'd been an engineer with a discipline problem. Now she might be these people's only hope. "Yeah," she said with a grim smile. "I help Krith, and we're gonna make these others regret ever finding your planet." "No, no, no. You're holding it upside down, KTLK." Cass pinched the bridge of her nose as the Krith warrior sheepishly flipped the makeshift weapon. "The pointy end goes toward the bad guys, universal constant across the galaxy, I promise." 3 weeks into operation Don't Get Slaughtered by Aliens, she was working on a catchier name, and progress was happening. Sort of. The Krith were quick learners, but had evolved as craftspeople and farmers, not warriors. Their society had no concept of organized violence before the others now identified as the Vorex. A spacefaring species of resource pirates had arrived 6 planetary cycles ago. Again, she commanded, and the line of 20 Krith raised their weapons, a motley assortment of repurposed mining tools, scavenged parts from Cass's pod, and components salvaged from the crashed Vorex ship. Ready position. Aim. Fire. Energy pulses streaked across the practice field, most missing the crude target dummies completely. A few hit nearby rocks, One ricocheted dangerously close to Cass's head, and exactly one struck a dummy squarely in the chest equivalent, causing it to explode in a satisfying shower of sand and crystal fragments. "That's better," Cass lied. The copper-skinned leader, who called himself Mektal, approached her. The translator shell had been modified into a collar device that now produced smoother speech. "Krith not made for fighting," he said, his three eyes blinking in their unsettling non-pattern. "We create. Grow. Build." "I know," Cass sighed. "But the Vorex aren't coming to negotiate." After extensive communication with the Krith elders and examination of the Vorex technology, Cass had pieced together the situation. The Vorex were systematic harvesters who found resource-rich planets, stripped them bare, and often took native populations as slave labor. They'd already taken nearly 50 Krith in their previous raids, along with vast quantities of the crystal formations that were apparently rare and valuable power sources in the wider galaxy. "Different approach," Mektal suggested, gesturing toward the settlement. Cass followed him to a large communal building where dozens of Krith were busily constructing something. The floor was covered in intricate drawings that looked like circuit diagrams mixed with artistic mandalas. "What is this?" "Base," Krith trap making. "Old tradition for catching river swimmers." Cass stepped closer, her engineer's eye recognizing the genius in the designs. These weren't just traps. They were complex, automated systems that could be triggered remotely or by specific conditions. "Mektal, you beautiful metallic genius, we don't need to turn your people into soldiers. We need to turn this entire planet into one giant booby trap." The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of frantic activity. Cass's military engineering training merged with Krith traditional knowledge to transform the valley into a defensive nightmare. Crystal-powered mines were buried at strategic landing points. Sensor arrays cobbled together from pod components and Vorex wreckage would alert them to approaching ships. The river was rigged with mechanisms that could immediately alter its flow, creating flash floods on command. Even the native wildlife was incorporated. A pen of agitated Discus bastardus awaited release in the direction of unwary invaders. On the ridge overlooking the valley, Cass hammered the final stake into the ground and stepped back to admire her work. A flag fluttered in the breeze, a piece of thermal sheeting dyed with mineral pigments. On it, the crystalline formations of KX-417 formed a starburst pattern around a silhouette of Earth. "What symbol means?" KTLK asked, having become her most dedicated assistant and something approximating a friend. "It's our battle flag. Every defensive position needs one." She grinned. "Admiral Thornton always said my problem was I didn't respect proper authority. She never specified whose authority I needed to respect." KTLK made the chattering sound Cass had learned was Krith laughter. "You strange, Cass human. I'll take that as a compliment." She checked her makeshift chronometer. "The Vorex are due tomorrow, according to your lunar calendar. Final checks on all systems. All traps ready. All Krith in positions." KTLK hesitated, then added, scared. Cass nodded, surprising herself with her honesty. "Me too. But remember, they're expecting helpless victims. Not an alliance with a very pissed-off human who's had 6 months to prepare a welcome party." That night, unable to sleep, Cass sat outside her pod updating the journal she'd faithfully maintained. The 3 moons of KX-417 hung in the sky like mismatched eyes watching over her. Final entry before Vorex arrival, defense preparations complete. Krith morale high despite understandable terror. "If we succeed, we establish first contact between humanity and 2 new species, though one might not be very chatty after we're done with them. If we fail..." She paused, then continued with determination. "If we fail, whoever finds this record should know that Lieutenant Cassidy Morgan did not die alone on a dead planet as intended. She died defending it after it came alive around her." She closed the journal and looked up at the stars, wondering if somewhere up there, Admiral Thornton had any idea what she'd set in motion by exiling one troublesome engineer to a supposedly dead planet. The computer, update survival probability. Based on current data and imminent hostile encounter, 31%. Cass chuckled. I've beaten worse odds. Wake me at first light. The Vorex arrived with the dawn a sleek, predatory ship that cut through the atmosphere with practiced precision. It was larger than Cass had anticipated, at least 3 times the size of the wreckage she'd studied. This wasn't a scouting vessel, it was a full harvester. Well, crap, she muttered from her observation post on the ridge. KTLK, tell your people to double-check the reinforcements on Trap Series C and D. The Krith nodded and sent the message through their crystalline communication network, another ingenious system Cass had helped optimize using principles from quantum entanglement. Through her salvaged binoculars, she watched the Vorex ship settle into a landing pattern directly above their primary target zone. Come on, you greedy bastards. Just a little closer to the sweet spot. The ship hovered, scanning. For one heart-stopping moment, Cass thought they'd detected the traps. Then the vessel descended precisely where she wanted it atop the buried network of crystal-powered electromagnetic pulse generators. Now, she shouted into her communicator. Beneath the valley floor, 60 precisely arranged crystalline formations activated simultaneously. A wave of electromagnetic energy pulsed upward, invisible but devastating to the Vorex ship's systems. The vessel shuddered, its engines sputtering as it dropped the final 20 meters in an uncontrolled fall, landing with a ground-shaking impact that sent dust clouds billowing across the valley. Phase 1 complete, Cass announced with grim satisfaction. Phase 2 in 3, 2, 1. On cue, the hidden Krith activated the perimeter defenses. Geysers of superheated water erupted around the ship, creating a disorienting steam cloud. Through the mist, Cass could see the ship's hatches opening as the first Vorex emerged. They were not what she expected. 8 feet tall, with exoskeletal armor naturally grown over sinewy bodies, they resembled bipedal mantises with extra limbs that appeared specialized for different functions. Some carried energy weapons, others equipment clearly designed for resource extraction. Charming, Cass muttered. KTLK released the Discus Bastardus. A series of pens opened remotely, and 24 of the razor-edged living frisbees spun into action, streaking through the steam toward the confused Vorex. The aliens' reactions were military fast, but they weren't prepared for the native wildlife. 3 Vorex went down immediately, their exoskeletons unable to withstand the spinning assault. The others retreated toward their ship, only to trigger the second wave of traps. The ground beneath them liquefied as previously buried chemical agents activated. 6 more Vorex sank to their knees, struggling against the suddenly quicksand-like terrain. Phase 3. Cass commanded. 50 Krith rose from hidden positions, activating the repurposed mining equipment now fashioned into energy weapons. Their aim was still terrible, but with the Vorex partially immobilized, it didn't matter much. The valley erupted with pulse fire. What happened next was something Cass would later describe in her report as a tactical shift in advantage parameters, which was military speak for all hell broke loose. The Vorex, despite their technological superiority, were caught completely off guard by the organized resistance. Their command structure broke down as communications failed due to the lingering EMP effects. Individual soldiers fought ferociously, but without coordination. Cass had anticipated this and positioned her forces accordingly. Teams of Krith maintained safe distances while continuing to trigger sequential traps, tripwires that released rock slides, pressure plates that activated geyser vents, and remotely controlled crystal bombs that disrupted Vorex weapon systems. Suddenly, her communicator crackled. Cass human. Ship door open. Center vessel exposed. This was the critical moment. The ship's core would be guarded, but if they could capture it intact. I'm on my way. Maintain perimeter fire. She slid down the ridge path, dodging energy blasts as she ran toward the downed ship. 3 Vorex guards spotted her approach. Unlike the Krith, Cass had made sure her own aim was impeccable. 2 quick shots from her modified Alliance sidearm dropped the first guards. The third charged, mandibles clicking in what she assumed was battle rage. She waited until the last second, then dropped flat. The Vorex, unable to adjust its momentum, stumbled over her and directly into the path of KTLK's energy staff. The alien collapsed in a twitching heap. Nice timing, Cass panted as KTLK helped her up. Krith learns quickly, he replied with what approximated a smile on his metallic features. Together they fought their way to the ship's command center, a surprisingly compact room dominated by crystalline control interfaces. Two Vorex officers turned to face them, weapons raised. "Any chance you'd like to surrender?" Cass asked cheerfully. The answer came in the form of energy blasts that barely missed her head. "Didn't think so." What followed was 30 seconds of chaos, ending with two unconscious Vorex officers, a slightly singed Cass, and KTLK standing triumphantly over the ship's control systems. "We win?" the Krith asked uncertainly. Outside, the sounds of battle were fading. Cass activated her communicator. "Status report?" Mektal's voice responded, remaining Vorex retreating to secondary ship. There was a pause then. Ship leaving atmosphere. A smaller vessel, likely an attached scout craft, was escaping. Cass considered the battle map in her mind. They had achieved their primary objective, capturing the harvester ship. The escaping vessel carried survivors who would report their defeat, but that wasn't necessarily bad. She looked at the control interface. "Let's see if I can figure out how to work this thing." 3 hours later, as KX-417's orange sun began to set, Cass stood amidst the Krith celebration, tallying their victory. 14 Vorex dead, 11 captured, their ship seized mostly intact, and not a single Krith casualty, though several had injuries requiring their equivalent of medical attention. Mektal approached, carrying something wrapped in fabric. "For Cass Human," he said, presenting it formally. She unwrapped it to find a staff made from the ship's metal, topped with a crystalline formation shaped into a sharp point. "Symbol of Krith Protector," Mektal explained, "first in history." Cass felt a lump in her throat as she accepted the staff. 6 months ago, she'd been exiled to die. Now she stood as the protector of an entire civilization, with a captured alien ship and the beginnings of a battle strategy for liberation. She called to her ever-present pod AI, update survival probability. Based on current data, 87% and rising. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days after being dumped on KX-417, Lieutenant Cassidy Morgan stood on the bridge of a Vorex harvester ship. Renamed the Discus Revenge, she'd lobbied hard for middle finger to Thornton, but the Krith translator couldn't handle the idiom. "Final system check complete," KTLK announced from the engineering station they'd modified to accommodate his smaller stature. "Ship ready for hyperspace." Around the bridge, a crew of 12 Krith-operated stations with a proficiency that made Cass's chest swell with pride. The past 2 months had been a crash course in interstellar ship operations, so made possible by the Vorex command codes they'd extracted from the captured officers and Cass's own military training. "Communications check?" Mektal nodded, his metallic skin gleaming under the bridge lights. "Translator systems synchronized with Alliance frequencies. They will understand Krith words." "Navigation?" "Oh, course to Alliance Outpost Delta 9 plotted," answered another Krith. 9 hours in hyperspace." Cass settled into the captain's chair modified with cushions, since Vorex apparently had exoskeletons of steel, and took a deep breath. "Last chance to back out," she told her crew. "Once we enter Alliance space, there's no telling how they'll react to an unregistered alien vessel with an Owl lieutenant and a crew of shiny people they've never seen before." KTLK made the chattering sound of Krith laughter. "Cass Human worry too much. We have plan." "We have 7 different plans, depending on whether they shoot first or ask questions first." She grinned. "My money's still on shooting." With a final check of her uniform salvaged from her original gear and supplemented with Krith-made embellishments that denoted her status as their protector, Cass gave the order. "Engage hyperspace drive. Let's go crash an Admiral's Day." The journey passed in tense anticipation. Cass used the time to refine her report, a document so meticulously detailed it would make even the most bureaucratic Alliance paper pusher weep with joy. Evidence of the Vorex threat, geological surveys confirming KX-417's valuable resources, first contact protocols with the Krith, and a comprehensive account of how one exiled lieutenant had turned a dead planet into an Alliance military advantage. Alliance Outpost Delta 9 appeared on their sensors exactly on schedule. The massive space station orbited a gas giant, its defensive systems immediately locking onto the approaching Vorex vessel. "Incoming transmission," Mektal announced. "Put it through." The view screen flickered to life, revealing the stern face of an Alliance officer. "Unidentified vessel. You are entering restricted space. Identify yourself immediately, or we will open fire." Cass leaned forward, enjoying the moment perhaps a bit too much. "This is Lieutenant Cassidy Morgan of the Galactic Alliance, formerly assigned to Engineering Corps, currently commanding the captured vessel Discus Revenge with a crew of allied Krith representatives from planet KX-417. Request permission to dock and speak with the commanding officer." The silence that followed was almost as satisfying as the officer's jaw literally dropping. "Lieutenant Morgan, you're listed as deceased. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated and bureaucratically convenient." She smiled sweetly. "How about that docking permission?" 2 hours and several security checks later, Cass stood in Admiral Thornton's office, the woman having been summoned from a nearby sector upon confirmation of Cass's identity. The Admiral's face was a study in conflicting emotions, shock, disbelief, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Lieutenant Morgan," Thornton began stiffly, "your return is unexpected." "I bet." Cass placed a data crystal on the desk and my complete report. 6 months on KX-417. First contact with the Krith species, hostile engagement with the Vorex harvesters, and a preliminary alliance treaty I took the liberty of drafting. And comprehensive geological surveys showing deposits of crystal formations that make our current power sources look like potato batteries. Admiral Thornton picked up the crystal, her composure slipping. "You made first contact and engaged in combat with a hostile species, without authorization. Funny thing about being exiled to die, the chain of command gets a bit fuzzy." Cass shrugged. "I figured survival took priority over protocols. And these Krith. They're requesting alliance protection, more of a mutual defense pact. They've got resources we need. We've got the military might to keep the Vorex from turning their planet into a strip mine and their people into slaves." Cass leaned forward. "They named their planet Morgan's World, by the way. There's already a flag." The Admiral's eye twitched slightly. "Lieutenant, you realize the magnitude of—" "Actually," Cass interrupted, "about that. The Krith High Council has appointed me their official diplomatic representative, which according to Alliance First Contact Protocols Section 47B entitles me to a minimum rank of commander when serving as liaison." She smiled brightly. "I've included the relevant documentation in my report." Admiral Thornton stared at her for a long moment before letting out a resigned sigh. "You always were brilliant, Morgan, insubordinate as hell. But brilliant. Thank you, Admiral." "Don't thank me yet. The paperwork for this situation is going to be astronomical." "We've already completed and filed in triplicate," Cass replied smugly. "I had a lot of downtime between building weapons and teaching aliens how to overthrow invaders." As she left the Admiral's office, Cass found KTLK and Mektal waiting anxiously in the corridor. "Alliance agrees to terms?" Mektal asked. "They will," Cass assured him. "They can't afford not to, especially with the Vorex threat now on record." KTLK studied the bustling station around them, his 3 eyes blinking in wonder. "What happens now? Cass human?" Cass looked out the viewport where the Discus Revenge was docked, the flag of Morgan's World clearly visible on its hull, a once dead planet that now had both a name and a kill count. "Now, we go back home, show your people the stars, and make sure the Vorex think twice before harvesting any more planets." She grinned. "And maybe I'll program the station's AI to tell jokes during the diplomatic reception, for old time's sake." Computer's voice echoed from her salvaged communicator. "Updated survival probability, 99%. Congratulations, Lieutenant. Against all statistical probability, you have thrived." "No, Commander," Cass corrected. And thriving is what humans do best, especially when someone tells us we can't.